winter. And so that's a nice thing to kind of learn about. What does it mean? It means that you make them flower at a time when they're usually dormant or not flowering. And so they can do this for the, okay, we can do this for like the holidays, and you have probably seen paperwhites or amaryllis, or maybe even some pre-chilled hyacinths that are ready for holiday blooms, but it's not just those that you can do. So those spring bulbs that you love to see in the beginning of spring, you can force them to bloom in the winter, like daffodils, hyacinths, tulips, and even the small ones like crocus and snowdrops, those can all be forced too. And that will just let us have colorful blooms from late November to April. So let's start with what are the steps to forcing your bulbs. First, you have to select suitable varieties, and I have given Gail a link to put into the chat box that has some of the varieties that you can use, because some varieties are just better suited for forcing than others. And so I think it has hyacinths and maybe tulips and some others, and it gives you some information. If you want more, I found a place where it has all kinds of different varieties that you can use. But you would think about what color do you want? You would think about when are they going to bloom? When you're looking for the bulbs, you need to make sure that they don't have mold or mildew. You want the big bulbs, and make sure they don't have any soft spots, because those are going to be you're counting on that bulb holding all of what it needs to bloom. So you need to get a good quality one. Also, you want to look at how tall they're going to get, because the taller varieties may need staking, and that might not be what you want for indoors. So that could be something to think about. You also are going to have to think about proper potting, because if there's not good drainage, your bulbs may rot. And so you want a really well-drained media that drains well. And you also, so adding vermiculite or perlite is one way to increase drainage. Some of the spring bulbs, they're going to need a cold treatment, because they are adapted to go through a cold period before flowering. And so that time is going to vary from 12 to 17 weeks, depending on the variety. So you have to plan ahead for that. And then once they've gone through their cold treatment, you bring them to a cool room, and that you leave them there for about a month, and the shoots will develop, and then your flower buds will start to form. And once you get that, then you will move them to the place where you want to display them, and that will give you, and you want to make sure you have indirect light and cool nights to extend the bloom time. So here's some things about preparing. I said the high quality flowering size bulbs are important. You might be able to find really nice ones at your garden center. You can find them already pre-cooled. There's lots of things that you can check and make sure that they're high quality. Hyacinths and daffodils are the easiest ones to force if we're thinking about spring bulbs. Tulips can be a little more difficult, but you can also do the crocus, the grape hyacinths, and the snowdrops. And so those smaller bulbs are really pretty to do also. The reason that you need those high quality bulbs is because inside that bulb is the flower, that immature plant, and everything that is needed for that plant to grow is inside the bulb. So that's why bulbs can be forced, because they have everything they need already there. You can get pre-chilled bulbs, and we were talking about that in the magazine or the bulb catalog. So that would be something if we are already kind of past the time to start the cooling period, cold period. So if you want to do it this winter, you're probably going to have to look for some pre-chilled bulbs. Amaryllis and paperwhites that you see in the store at this time of year, they do not need to go through a cold period, because they come from a place where they don't have a cold period. So that is not necessary for them. And also keep in mind that later blooming varieties are going to need a little bit more cold time than the earlier blooming varieties. I also want to show you in this picture, you see the hyacinth in the glass. That's a special glass for hyacinth bulbs. You can start hyacinth bulbs in just water. Note, I'm going to talk about it when I talk about hyacinths, but this is my best picture, so I'm going to go over it. You want the water to just come to the very bottom where the roots can get into the water, but not the bulb, because you don't want it to at the bulb. So you have to make sure you keep your water level at the right height, because you don't want that rot to come in. They do need to be chilled though. So if you have a cool place, you can chill them. You can put them in the refrigerator. You can get the pre-chilled bulbs, but they would have to go through that cold period. So just if you were thinking you have one of these beautiful little glass vases that are specially made for hyacinth bulbs, that's something you can think about. But let's talk about hyacinths. So these can be either done in water or they can be potted. They're the most easily forced spring bulbs. So when usually people think about forcing spring bulbs, this is probably the one they're thinking about. You want to start doing this so they get the right cold period in late September or early October. And that's for the cold treatment. And then once it's gone through its cold treatment and it comes to the cool room, it takes a month after the chilling in the cool room for it to start to bloom. And the earliest blooms you're going to get are in mid-January. So some of the varieties that are good for that, Anne Marie is a bright pink hyacinth that would bloom in mid-January. There's Delft Blue, which is a porcelain blue one, and Innocence, which is a white one. So those would be some that if you wanted some flowers in January. Now there's other varieties with other colors and other times if you wanted to stagger those out throughout the season. Daffodils. So daffodils have lots of different varieties that are suitable for forcing, and they come in all different colors, of that daffodils. So yellow, white, and then the whites can have different colored cups like orange and salmon or yellow. So you want to find, you can get a bunch of varieties to get lots of different beautiful blooms. And again, you want to start these in October again, and then they'll start blooming from January to April. So keep in mind, you got to have that like 12-week cooling period. And then depending on when they bloom and when you take them out of the cold, you'll get the blooms about a month after that. So paper whites are in the same family, but they don't require the cold period. So you could start them in mid-October, and then every 2 weeks you could bring them or start a new one, and you would get flowers all the way from Thanksgiving to March. Some people, they say they have a strong scent. Some people really don't like it. Some people don't mind it. So that would be something to think about as you're thinking about paper whites. And on the right here, you see you can grow paper whites in just water also, but use the same thing. You want to keep the bulb out of the water and just let the roots grow in the water. A lot of times they'll put them on gravel or something. This picture doesn't have that, but just to keep the bulbs out of the water. So that would be something to think about for paper whites. And then tulips, you need to have these potted before the end of October. And the reason that you have to do them so early is because you got to have a time for root growth. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Again, once you bring them into the cool room, it's a month before they start to bloom. And for tulips, they have a flat side on the bulb, and so they recommend that you plant with the flat side facing out of on the outside of the pot, because the biggest leaves will be on the outside, and it gives you a more uniform look. So some tulips, there's a Christmas gold that would bloom in early January. It's a deep yellow one. There's Attila, which will bloom in mid-January, which is purple, and then there's a color cardinal, which would bloom in early February, which is a cardinal red. So you can see you can get all different colors. Even, I mean, you know, tulips have a lot of different colors, more than maybe daffodils or things like that. So all different bloom times and all different colors. And I wanted to make sure we talked about Amaryllis, these big, beautiful flowers. They do not need a chilling period. And you can pot them, leaving a third of the bulb above the soil line. Once they flower, you will want to rotate the pot every couple of days to keep the stem straight and enjoy that flowering. They have all different kinds. They have all, like, they're mostly reds and pinks and whites. And then you can get some doubles, you can get some miniature. So there's lots of different flowers that you can look at. After flowering, you want to fertilize it and then let it grow out over the summer. In September, you stop watering it and let it die back because it needs a dry dormant period. And then in December, November or December, you start watering it again and you will get that growth and have that bloom start coming up at that time. You can repot them every few years, but you don't want to put it in too big of a pot. The pot can only be about 1 or 2 inches wider than the diameter of the bulb. And something to keep in mind is that Amaryllis like to do better when they're pot bound. So that's something to think about. Okay, so let's get into what we need to pot them. So you need a 4 to 8 inch diameter pot. You can use plastic as long as it has good drainage. They say it's preferable to use clay ones, and you can even look for the shorter ones that would be bulb pots or azalea pots, and make sure they're clean because you don't want any disease. You need to remember that your pot needs to be 2 times deeper than you intend to plant the bulbs, and you need at least 2 inches of potting mix under below the bulb. It's also important that the potting mix is well drained. The key ingredient in any potting media is air. And so you could mix your own with soil and sharp sand and peat moss, or you can get a professional soilless sterile potting mix. As long as it drains well, you're going to be okay. It doesn't need high fertility. Like I said, everything is in the bulb already. So it doesn't need high fertility. The main important thing is that it drains well. And you also need to make sure that you keep the media moist, but not wet, because that rot in the bulbs is one of the big concerns if it stays too wet. Labels are just so that you remember whatever you have planted and the variety and when. You can label all those things. They can be plastic or metal or whatever works for you. And then a thermometer just to keep the track of the temperature of the soil. Okay, so how do we pot them? Well, you pot them in October. And for different bulbs, you need different amounts of soil. So you're not going to follow the potting or how you would plant them in the garden. This is a different environment, so they're going to need different requirements. So you can leave a hyacinth and a tulip with only the tip above the soil line. Daffodils can have half the bulb above the soil line, and the small bulbs you want to make sure they have they're planted 1 inch below the soil line. And if you pick a 6-inch pot, you can do 3 hyacinths in a 6-inch pot, 6 tulips, or 15 crocus or small bulbs. So that gives you an idea of how many you can put in there. When you plant them, you don't want to pack down the potting mix since drainage is critical, but you also need to make sure the soil is firm enough to retain adequate moisture through the growing period and to keep the bulbs in place. So there's this balancing point, right? You don't want it packed down too much, but you want to make sure that it's supporting the bulbs. We don't follow the garden planting instructions for the depth, but we also can plant them close together because in this environment, it's okay. And we want that display to be really full and beautiful. So let's talk about how we chill them. So most bulbs need to be chilled from 12 to 17 weeks. Keep in mind that if it's an earlier blooming variety, it will need less cold time than a later blooming variety. And so if you are looking at, if it says for this variety, for tulips, it's 12 to 15 weeks, If it's supposed to be an early blooming one, you go more toward 12. And if it's a late blooming, you go more toward 15. And you can kind of count on, in general, it being 3 months from potting and cold treatment to bloom. So I've seen different ways of them telling you to do it. One is that you decrease the temperature gradually, and they spend a couple 3 to 5 weeks at 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you cool them to 3 weeks at 38 to 45, which is probably more like your natural progression to the cooler weather. But you can also just put them in a 40-degree refrigerator and keep them cold at that constant temperature for the time that you need to do. So if you put them in the refrigerator, though, you have to realize that you can't have other fruit in there, like especially apples, because the ethylene that's produced will cause them to have flowering issues. So make sure there's no fruit near them. Other places that you can keep them are an unheated basement, a crawl space, a cold frame, especially if it's on the shady north side, or you can dig a trench that's about 15 inches deep. Make sure it has something so that the water can drain out of it, and then cover that with like a couple inches of leaves and maybe straw, and then you'll be able to take those out when this cold time is up. And make sure that the soil stays moist. Again, we don't want it to be wet, but we don't want it to dry out either. During this time is when the roots are going to start to develop. And so you want a good amount of root. That's the important thing during this cool time. You want to make sure that you are chilling them you place them outside about 3 weeks before a hard freeze so that the roots have time to develop. Then you'll start seeing like a couple inches of a yellow or white shoot. And that's going to start to tell you when they're ready to come inside. If you stored the bulbs in the refrigerator prior to potting, you have to subtract that time off of the cold period, because if you go too long, it can affect the stem length, and they will be too short and the flowers won't develop properly. So you have to make sure you're paying attention to how long they've been in the cold, even if it was before potting. Okay. So after chilling, then you would bring the bulbs into not the cold treatment, but a cool area, about 60 degrees Fahrenheit with indirect light. The bulbs will start to flower in about a month. The shoots will become green as they're exposed to light. And so you'll start seeing that develop. However, if you're doing hyacinths, sometimes the stem will not elongate. So one of the tricks they do is put a pot or a cup over the top of it until that stem starts to elongate, so that it is able to have the flower up above the bulb and not it down in the rosette. Now, if you bring it in and the foliage is frozen, then you don't want to touch it. You just allow it to slowly thaw. And then after a couple days, you move it to your cool room. And then once the blooms begin to show color, you move them to where you want to display them. If you want longer bloom times, then you want to make sure that it's kept cool at night. And another thing you can do is take them out of the cold period like a new pot every week, so that you have a bloom coming every week. And so as one is done, you'll be getting a new one. And then after flowering, you can't force bulbs 2 years in a row. It just takes too much energy from them. So you really will be treating them like annuals. Most of them, you're just going to have to say, enjoy the blooms and then realize that they're done. However, daffodils are very vigorous growers, and so you can get them to rebloom if you potted them in a pot. Paper whites that are done in water are not going to rebloom, but daffodils that you had in media, you can let them grow. Cut the flowers off, but let the foliage grow. Take it outside for the summer, and then as it dies back, then you go ahead and in the fall plant those bulbs like you would any other fall bulb. And it, according to the garden directions, it may not bloom that next spring. It may need a year of foliage growth to get the energy back into the bulb to flower again. But that is some one that might possibly bloom again. Otherwise, you know, it's an experiment. Can you get it to grow or not? That it's what you're willing to try. It may not work. It might work. Who knows? If you force them in water, the hyacinths or the paper whites, those will not flower again. They're done. They've used all their energy. And the last thing is to keep records. What variety did you use? How long did you, was it the cold treatment? How many weeks after bloom, are weeks to bloom after you brought it in? And keep track of those things so that you can start to develop this information for your winter gardening and your bulb forcing. Okay, with that, do you have any questions?
You're welcome to unmute your mic if you'd like to ask a question, or you can type it into the chat box and we'll be monitoring that for you. That's a beautiful pot that she's got up on the screen, isn't it?
That one they probably did in layers. So they put the ones that would bloom first on the top, and then an inch of soil, and then another variety underneath it that would bloom second. And then the last bloomers would be on the bottom, and then they all make a nice mix at the top.
I was going to ask, I have Amaryllis that used, when I first got them, they bloomed, and then maybe a little bit the next year, but last 2 years they didn't bloom at all. And this year I put them out in the garden. I don't know what to do to get them to bloom, or do they just lose their energy and not bloom at all after several years?
They will rebloom for several years. Did you try repotting them or fertilizing over the summer?
Yes. And I took them in, dug them up this fall and let them lay a little bit, and then I put them in pots with fresh soil. They're in a cool basement right now in a dormant period. So I don't know. They look nice, the bulbs, but
yeah, they just, from what I tell, you got to make sure the pot isn't too big and that it has that dry dormant period, and then hopefully they'll bloom. I don't know.
I may give them 1 or 2 more years and then throw them away otherwise, because they take a lot of room. And
yeah, but
and I usually get the leaf stalk, the big stalk of leaves, but no flower stalk.
No shoot, huh?
Oh, no.
What did you fertilize them with?
I don't remember. Probably flowering fertilizer when I watered the whole garden.
Yeah, you'd want to keep back on the nitrogen, I would think, because that can make them too many leaves. That would be another thing you could check.
Last year I left them in the pots and sat the pots outside and then watered them from time to time, and I guess I fertilized them. They didn't bloom at all last winter. So this year I took them, planted them in the garden. I don't know.
Well, yeah, maybe they just needed a year to gain some energy. Maybe they'll,
Yeah.
and if not, maybe you get some new ones.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I know there's a new bulb being sold by a couple bulb people where they'll actually have the Amaryllis bulb heavily waxed so that you can just like set them on a counter. I don't know if anybody.
That.
I saw that in the store.
I did too.
That was kind of interesting. That's pretty specialized right at the moment, I believe. I don't think it's widely available, but it was and they showed some of them hung upside down and in wire planters, and very interesting stuff that they come up with. So, we'll, after we're done with our questions here, Beth is just going to share how she potted up her kit. And I will tell you, as Nicole mentioned, tulips can be a little more difficult. So when you're successful with tulips, you guys know you can go backwards and have all kinds of really easier ones to do at your home. So I don't want to say you're being challenged, but you do have to wait a little bit till after probably Valentine's Day to get your color. But I hope this program inspired you to get addicted to forcing bulbs and starting early in the season and having them come on all through the year. Any other questions for Nicole before we move on to Beth?
I was wondering, could you dig some, at this point, dig bulbs out of your garden? You know, if you knew where they were and you could dig them up and put them in pots?
I don't know if they've
No,
had
maybe
enough
not,
cold
no.
time. I don't know if they've had enough cold time yet.
Yeah, you're probably right. I never thought of it.
Because it hasn't been that cold, and
Yeah,
we're just now starting December. I think they would probably need until a little bit longer, because I mean, the minimum that I read was 12 weeks.
yeah. Or you could, okay.
So, but then you run into the problem is the ground gonna be frozen and you're not going to be able to.
Yeah.
You could dig
Well, you could
them
dig them
out.
and do the cold forcing, or cold, what do you call it? Forcing, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, you could dig them now and then put them in pots and just subtract whenever it started to get cold. So the cold period is like 40 degrees. So if you know when your soil was 40 degrees, you could calculate
Yeah,
out. But
yeah, that's just a
that
thought.
I think that gets tricky if you haven't been keeping track of your temperature.
Yeah, it hasn't been that cold yet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have a cool day here and there, but that doesn't mean that the soil is cold.
That's true.
Nicole, does the bulb need to be chilled in the soil, or can it just be put in a refrigerator by itself?
It
Does it
doesn't
need to-
have to be in the soil. I think that's just, that just keeps it kind of even temperature in
Moist?
the
Okay.
refrigerator. So if you're gonna do water, I would just chill them in the refrigerator. I think I wouldn't, or if you have a place like a crawl space or someplace where they can be protected and kind of stay at an even temperature. I don't think they have to be in the soil. I think that just is, you've already done the work. So when you get them out of the cold, you can just display them, you know.
Okay.
But the cold doesn't have to be in the soil.
So once they've been chilled for the 12 weeks or so, you put them in a cool environment to start to grow?
So you
Does it
go
need-
from about 40 degrees in the cold treatment.
Mhm.
And you should start seeing the yellow shoots, maybe 1 or 2 inches. And then you bring them into a cool room, which is about 60 degrees Celsius, or it's not Celsius, that's 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm sorry, I was a science teacher for a long time. And so we always talked in Celsius. So 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and just keep them cool. And then they'll get that shoot growth and start to develop your flower stalks during that cool time. Once you see the buds develop and color start forming, that's when you can move them to a display. But you'll get longest bloom if you keep them kind of cool at night.
Now, when you bring them out for the stage 2 growth, is that in a totally dark area, or is it just limited light?
Indirect light.
So like in a basement where you get a little bit of filtered light?
Yeah, because they need to start photosynthesizing when you bring them into the cool room.
Okay.
Except for the hyacinths, until you see that shoot elongating, they keep them in the dark. Because sometimes the hyacinth won't elongate the stem, and it forms the flower right at the base, and that's not a very nice display.
So I don't want to interrupt. I just want to ask really quickly, are you seeing my screen?
I do see your screen, yes.
Okay, then keep discussing. I just wanted to verify that things were still looking good for us all.
Yes, it looks good.
Great. Anybody else have any questions? Like I said, I know tulips may be more challenging, but I think you're really going to enjoy bringing in some color and having some at the holiday time. And we all get spring crazy, starting in January and February. So I have a friend that does bulbs and he has all these different amaryllis and he puts on Facebook page different flowers all through the winter, and it's so heavenly to see. So we want to thank you so much, Nicole, for taking time this morning to share with us some information on forcing bulbs.
I put an article that has some different varieties and some other information. I put that in, so you can go ahead and click on that and it'll take you to that one.
Yeah, so that's great. That's in the chat
There's
box,
another
folks.
one that from Missouri that has a bunch of different varieties. I mean, it tells you the same information, but basically, but it has a whole 3 tables of different varieties. If you would like me to put that one in, I can do that too.
Yeah, if you would, that would be great. And if you guys, you can click on that, or sometimes I'll snap a photo of that so I make sure I don't lose that.
Yeah, I just
great.
click on it and bring it up and then I look at it later.
Yeah, absolutely. So wonderful. Thanks for all that information. So now I would like to introduce Beth Meyer. Beth Meyer is a master gardener for Unit 23, which is what we call Bond, Clinton, Marion, Washington, and Jefferson County, and down in Southern Illinois, for those that are calling in from different locations. She's going to share how to pot, just a little demonstration. So we'll start that. So Beth, I'll let you take off.
Okay, I'm just saying that Nicole covered most of the things that we will be covering, but this is a little addition, I guess. Well, in the fall, a lot of garden centers and stores have bulbs that you can put in the ground, but this is a way to have flowers bloom in your house in the cold winter months. So we're starting here by gathering the material we need for this cold forcing. Today we planted red eclipse tulips. The bigger tulips are better, bigger bulbs, I meant. Choose good quality, good size bulbs. Bulbs should be firm and clear of any mold or mildew. Some bulbs, the daffodils, tulips, and hyacinths, will have a paper-like covering that's called a tunic. And if you should leave it on, but if it comes off, it's not that big of a deal. So here we're gathering all of our material, 5 or 6 inch pots. The pots can be clay or plastic or resin. Plastic pots work good. You can put the plastic pot in a larger pot that's a more decorative pot and it'll look nice. If you have clay pots, it's suggested to put them in water the night before to absorb some water so they don't pull the moisture out of the soil when you plant, because clay pots will do that. And you'll need water and a plastic bag to put them in and to twisty tie to seal them. Okay. Make sure your pot has good drainage. Well, we talked about if you reuse pots, make sure you clean it with warm soapy water and rinse it. That would work, but that's up to you. Light plastic pots work well. Make sure they have good drainage. Okay, you want to fill in fill in soil, new fresh garden, good potting soil, about 1/3 of the way in the pot, about 1/3 of soil in the third bottom of the pot. That's what we're doing here. When you stand the bulb into that soil. Don't press it in. You can look on your bulb. There's a hairy root on one end. That will form into the roots or grow into roots, and you put that in the bottom of the soil with the pointy end facing up. Don't press it into the soil. You should avoid having them touch, but it's not that big of a deal. A 6-inch pot can accommodate 3 hyacinth, 6 tulips or 6 daffodils or 15 crocus. When we potted them, we used 4 on the outside and 1 in the middle, so that was 5. Here's a picture of the bulb. They have a flat side. You want to put the flat side against the outside of the pot because of the leaf that grows. Now, I found one place where it says on the flat side, the first or lowest leaf produced by the flowering shoot will always produce toward the flat side of the bulb. The lowest leaves will arch over the rim and create an attractive appearance. So that's why you want to put the flat side against the rim. Here's our pot that we put them in. Do not remove the paper covering if you have it on there. And then you want to cover that with soil, the rest of your soil. Don't press the soil in, just tap the pot a little bit to settle the soil. Leave a 1/4 inch space at the top for watering. Then we had to take our pot outside and water it. Allow the water to run through, or you could do it in a sink someplace if you were able to. Just make sure that it gets moisture from watering through the entire soil, but let it drain out. Then you want to put that pot in a plastic bag and seal the bag and put a few puncture holes in the bag for the venture bag. So then you'll put it someplace for your cold treatment, referred to as veneralization. The bulbs need a cold temperature, 25 to 45 degrees for 12 to 13 weeks. It can be in cold as long as 18 weeks, but it kind of depends on the bulb, if it's early blooming or late blooming. You don't need to fertilize because the bulbs have enough food stored in them from the green leaves from the year before. You can put them in anything cool, any location that's cool, an attic or basement, cellar, a cold frame, or your refrigerator. And we're putting these in the refrigerator. Make sure you keep them away from fresh fruit that gives off the ethylene, which will kind of mess up the bulb's ripening. We're storing ours in the refrigerator. Now, if you've left the bulbs in a cold refrigerator before you plant them, you can subtract that length of time from your total length of time for vernalization. Okay, once potted, the bulbs, after your 12 to 13 or 14, whatever weeks you keep them in the cold, they're brought out of the cold treatment, and the shoots and the foliage and the stalk will start to appear. You want to put them in a cool area, 50 to 60 degrees first, in a sunny window. After the shoots begin to expand and grow, move the pot to a warmer location, but in direct sunlight. Not indirect, but out of direct sunlight, I should say. One bloom. Keep the bulbs, keep it in a cooler location because the bulbs will grow and bloom longer. And in about 3 to 4 weeks, you should have some beautiful blooms. They said the hardest part is after this, tossing the finished blooms in your compost pile, because the bulbs have spent and used up all their stored food. But I've read that some bulbs, especially daffodils, can be transplanted into the garden in the spring or kept in the pot till they go dormant, and in the fall, plant them in the garden. They may not bloom the first year, but they probably will get enough food and energy to bloom the following years. But that's up to you. Okay. But they said tulips, maybe hyacinths, crocus aren't good for keeping to bloom a following year. Okay, thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. And any questions?
Does anybody have any additional questions? So Beth did a great job of just sharing with us with some visuals of planting your kits or any plants that you have. A note that you, just so you know, so when we purchased the bulbs before delivering them to you, we've had them in the refrigerator close to 3 weeks. So they have had several weeks of cold treatment. Monday when they were delivered. So if you pot those up in the next day or two and get those back in the fridge or your cool location, you should be able to subtract those weeks from your cold treatment. So, and that's what happens when you buy the pre-cooled bulbs. You're buying them, so you just have to pot them up. So anyways, thank you both, Nicole and Beth, for sharing with us. Any other questions? Anybody feel free to unmute your mic. We have a small group.
Hey, Gail.
Yeah.
One thing I might suggest, because my memory is terrible and I don't always write things down, is write down on your pot when you do it, the date it's, you know, you're supposed to get it out of the refrigerator.
Yeah,
or
I
wherever
forgot.
you store it.
That's a good idea. I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful, because all of us, and especially if you're going to do some multiples. So when I
Yeah.
was shopping for the soil, I found this adorable, very shallow footed bowl. And I thought to myself, that is meant for forcing crocus in. So I purchased that. Of course, I didn't have any crocus bulbs, but it's on my list for next year. It's a fun pot. So yeah, so, you know, that's
So-
great.
I just want Beth to know that I was doing it while she was reading it. So I
Oh,
Oh,
just completed.
we should have had your video on,
I
Mr.
just
Gordon.
completed mine and have it bundled up in the bag, and I'm gonna take it down and put it in the downstairs refrigerator.
All right, that's what I call on the spot. So wonderful. I look
Well, that's
forward
why I wanted it. It was to do it, you know, it's kind of like I was there, you know, we were all together.
yeah, it's not
We're-
that hard to do.
We're
No,
happy to
it's
hear
very,
that.
very easy.
So yeah,
I really had never imagined that they had to be chilled so long. I just, you know.
yeah, and again, the fact that we chose tulips perhaps might have been a little, I hope it's not too challenging, but when you do shop for bulbs, the height of the bulb is good. So some of your tulips could be awful tall. So really watch that height of some of those tulips. Some of your catalogs will tell you which ones are more favorable for forcing.
Yeah.
So, very, very fun, guys. On the last screen here, not only did Nicole put a couple things in the chat box that I definitely hope you open, because I'm sure they're wonderful references. These are a couple references that Beth used to pull together some of the information for the PowerPoint. And these are also good. And these are also for those that got the kit. These all these PowerPoint slides are in the bag. So hopefully that will keep you from and help you continue on with your process. Any other questions? I think Nicole's still on if you have any questions. Otherwise, we'll wind down for the day. All right. Again, this was recorded, so this will show up on our YouTube channel. And I know there's quite a few other people that are going to watch it after. So I'm sorry they couldn't be with us today. But for those of you who are here, we really thank you for participating. And thank you again, Nicole and Beth.